Aerial photography, one of my favorite things to do. I want to expand a bit from what I show you in the workbook on aerial photography. So from the simple things like SD cards and D filters, changing out the propellers, pairing your controller and drone, and diving a little bit deeper into the more advanced settings in the controller. So let's get started. Okay guys, so on the smart controller, you'll find the area for the micro SD card right here. Here I have the 64 gigabyte SanDisk micro SD card, okay? And then we're going to place that right in the top here, and it goes the other way. You're gonna kind of have to play with it and figure that out, okay? We're gonna just pop it in there, and the remote is good to go. And then similarly with the drone, this also has a space for the SD card. It's actually here on the left-hand side, and you'll see that right here. So that pops in and out the same way, and I'm using the same exact SD card for the drone as I do the controller. You may start out with one of these, which is totally fine. Here you can plug your phone in, and here's the little attachment. It comes with the different attachments for you guys depending on what type of phone that you have. So this controller is totally acceptable, and I used it when I first started out, and then I upgraded to the smart controller. When you first pair your drone with the controller, whichever one you might be using, this side of the drone has a little black button. And when the drone is powered on, it'll show red. And then once you're pairing, you simply press this button right here, and it'll pair with the remote controller. So you won't want to leave that step out, especially if you switch from controller to controller. You'll want to make sure that the accessories are paired together. So with this DJI product, this Mavic 2 Pro, and a lot of DJI products, it's a tap once and long hold to turn it on. You'll see that it is on, okay? And then same with the controller, guys. You just press and then long hold, and then the controller will power on. So the first thing I typically do is format the SD cards, internal and external. So the SD card in the drone and the SD card in the controller here. So that way I know everything from yesterday is cleared off, I'm starting fresh, and I'm ready to go. So you'll see there's a new firmware available. It's telling me you don't have to do that right away, especially if you're in a hurry or in between jobs. You can always take it home and just place it in your driveway and grab those updates. So you'll want to hit go fly. And once we're on this screen here, you'll click the little horizontal lines right there, and it brings you to the camera menu. And I'm going to go to settings. And down here is where I'm going to format the SD card, which is this one, okay. And then I'm going to format internal storage and say okay. Now the memory cards are wiped, we are fresh and clean and ready to go for the day. In the workbook, I shared the really basic settings for the drone when you first start out, and that's perfectly acceptable. I just wanted to show you how to bracket your photos on the drone as well. So there's a setting. You'll go into camera from this menu, same menu that we used to format the cards. You'll hit the little camera at the top, and then you'll see I am in the mode called AEB, and that stands for auto exposure bracketing. And that's for, high contrast scenes for HDR photography, which is what we do with our cameras when we're shooting inside and outside for real estate photography. So I just choose 3 brackets. There's only a choice of 3 or 5. And then as you notice, when you're in a single exposure, of course the click is 1. And now listen to this. So it's taking 3 images, and just like your camera photos, those will be merged together to create a nice image. So if you're in a situation where there's heavy light on the front of the house or the back of the house and creating some unfavorable shadows, you'll definitely want to bracket your images so we can get a nice blend of those exposures into the one image. As I mentioned in the workbook, I always shoot in RAW. This will provide the most information possible for the image and more editing capabilities as well. So always shoot in RAW. So as far as white balance goes, I typically shoot in auto, but you do have the option to manually adjust right here in custom. So if it's looking too warm or too cool and you want to play around with it, you definitely can. There's an app that I use for both interior photography as well as sometimes aerial photography. It's called Light Spectrum Pro, and I think it's $1.99 one-time fee to purchase, but it helps out a lot. You basically download the app on your phone, and here it is, guys, if you can see a little bit of it, and it tells you the Kelvin reading for the space that you're shooting. So it's telling me right here in this scene, my Kelvin adjustment should be around 5300, and then I could easily go here and toggle down to 5300. See how that changes? The lower the number, the more cool, the higher the number, the more warm. So around outside, as a general rule of thumb, 5400 typically is the number that you want to be at, but of course always check, use this app. There's so many tools out there to make sure you have the perfect white balance. Okay guys, so if you have a background in photography, you may be used to manual mode. In the workbook, I show you the auto settings for aerial photography, but I wanted to show you for those who are a little bit more comfortable with setting your parameters manually, this is how you would do it. You would select manual mode, which is M, and then for outdoor or exterior photos, you really only need an ISO of 100. As far as aperture goes, I like to keep it between 7 and 9 so you can get nice crisp photos where everything is in focus. And then shutter will be determined by your exposure meter there at the bottom. So right now I'm perfectly exposed, but say that my shutter was 1/50. It's showing me that I am 0.7 overexposed. So what I'm gonna do is move to the left here, 1/60, still a little bit overexposed. Now 1/80, and it's showing me that I'm perfectly exposed. So you'll use that exposure meter at the bottom to determine your shutter speed. And then vice versa, if I'm way over here at 1/200, it's showing me I'm underexposed. So I'm gonna get it back here to the middle, which is what we want it to be on, is a 0. And now I can't get it. As close as you can, guys, to the 0. There we go, up, -0.3, +0.3, it's totally fine. I would err on the negative side, and then you're ready to take your image. And then just to show you guys, I switched it to auto here. And then these are the settings that it chose for me, an aperture of 5, which is a little low for me. I really want between the 7 and 9 range. It has a shutter of 1/240, and that looks good as well, and that's totally acceptable. You can definitely have enough information in the photos, the bracketed images, to make sure everything looks nice and true to color. But as I've grown in photography and aerial photography, I do like to shoot on manual. That way you have full control over all the parameters of the photo. And if you just want to set your aperture, say you're just going to set it to 9 and be done with it, ISO 100. Here it's a little bit closer to that manual setting that I had where the shutter is 1/80. So play around with it, see what you think, do what's most comfortable for you in the beginning to grab that excellent photo. Okay, so switching from photo to video is super simple. All you have to do is tap on the little camera icon right here, and it now shows you a video camera, and here's the record button, okay? So similar to photo settings, you will hit this little icon here, and you have your 3 icons at the top. Now, with the Mavic 2 Pro, that's what this drone is that's connected to the smart controller, I have shot in 2K 60 frames per second. Now you're probably like, wait, what? It has 4K, why don't you use 4K? I use 2K 60 frames per second because I almost always have drone video footage that I want to slow down, and with 30 frames per second, it cannot be done in post or with editing. So I always choose 60 frames per second on this setting. Another completely fine format if you want to do is to choose, let's go back here, video size. You can choose 1080p, and then you can also select 60 frames per second. Now, you don't have to get fancy, guys, and I'm not saying that 2.7K is fancy, but I started out with 1080p, 60 frames per second on both drone and camera when I first started, just to kind of get my feet wet and comfortable with the settings, and then you can start to play around with it once you feel comfortable. So again, with video, you can set your white balance manually. I tend to keep it on auto just because you're changing positions with video frequently. So you could be doing a whip around a house, like a little orbit, and in one area it's perfectly exposed, and then you whip around the back of the house and it's underexposed. So for video, I tend to keep it on auto so that doesn't happen. Now with my regular camera on the gimbal, I can control each shot and each motion. So I'm more apt to play with the white balance there and then use that app on my phone that I shared with you guys. But for newbie purposes, and if you're completely a novice to this, stick with auto white balance. As far as auto mode or manual mode or aperture priority, again, when you're first starting out, I recommend auto, and I share those settings with you in the workbook. But as you become more comfortable, I always recommend manual mode. That way you can set your aperture here, or aperture priority is fine as well, the A right here. But say you want a more cinematic look. Say you want to go down to 2.8, and then down here on your exposure meter, we are overexposed 2.3. So that's a lot. So let's adjust our shutter here and get as close to 0 as possible. And there we are, 1/1000, ISO 100, and aperture 2.8. So that setting looks perfect to me, and that works. So just remember, guys, make sure to adjust your exposure meter just like you do in camera when you're taking photos inside. So there's a lot that you can do to play around, but at first, just test out auto and see how you like it. So always make note of your battery life. Mine right here is at 37%, so I know I have a little bit more time, but my device will start beeping at me at about 20 to 25%, so I know then it's time to land. Always have extra batteries on you, have them fully charged. You don't want to run into a situation where you have to come back to the property because you don't have enough battery life. Also, if you have a backup drone, that's a good thing to have as well. But understandably, when you first start, you'll probably only have one drone and a couple batteries. Now, before you take off, always make sure you find the home point for the drone. Set current aircraft position as the home point. Hit OK.
The home point has been updated. Please check it on the map.
Then you'll hear that lovely message, okay? Then you'll have more confidence when you take off that if something should happen in flight or your drone loses signal between the aircraft and the remote, that it would come back and land where it took off. It's so super important, guys. Don't miss that step. A lot of times it'll recognize your location automatically and it'll go ahead and say that without having to do this. But how I got there, guys, these 3 little dots on top, the drone icon, and then the home point settings. So that's all you have to do, guys, to set your home point and make sure that drone's gonna come back to you. In the beginning, I also recommend that you have it on beginner mode. Just go ahead and tap that. It'll say beginner mode enabled. Altitude and distance will both be limited to 100 feet. Beginner mode can be turned off in the main controller settings, which is where we just were. Again, those 3 little dots at the top. And somewhere on here, where did I just pass it? Here it is, beginner mode. Sometimes I get lost myself. So I'm gonna turn that off. Not a beginner anymore. The maximum altitude, as you'll find in your remote pilot course, it's 400 feet. And can also control your distance limit. I don't. I'm pretty good now at determining where I am and when I need to come back and battery life and all of that. So make sure you set those things in the beginning, guys. The beginner mode will also help with obstacle avoidance so you don't purposefully crash into anything. It'll stop your drone in its tracks before it hits that tree or another object. So speaking of obstacle avoidance, in the second icon down, right underneath the drone icon, you'll find the visual navigation settings. Make sure you enable forward and backward obstacle sensing. That way you don't get in trouble with crashing your drone. I've taken this setting off before, unselecting it. Mainly when I do fly-throughs through homes, I don't want it stopping me when I'm trying to have a definitive path. So just don't forget to turn that back on, guys. It'll save you, I promise. The fifth icon down here is regarding your battery. So I told you mine beeps starting at 25% battery life. You can adjust that wherever you'd like, but I've found that 25% is a good warning. Then I keep it up there for a couple more minutes and know that I'm running short on time and I've got to land. But I've found 25% to be a sweet spot for me, but adjust that accordingly. Okay, and this icon right here, you may never need it, but I've used it a couple times where the gimbal was kind of acting funky. Sometimes when you put the drone away, you use it so much, it can kind of get off kilter. You can go ahead and select auto calibrate gimbal, just like you calibrate your gimbal and camera when you're doing walkthrough video tours. It just kind of resets everything back to its place and it should be ready to go. Now, if it doesn't correct itself, that's when you'll have to send it back in for a DJI Care plan or a DJI Care refresh and have them take a look at it. The gimbal motor may be a little off and they may have to repair that for you. If you want to review your photos and make sure that you grabbed a shot, a lot of times realtors come out and they want to see the drone and I kind of lose track of where I'm at and I want to make sure I got what I needed. You can hit the play button down here and then it'll break it down by SD card and internal storage. So you can just choose from the drop down menu here, either SD or internal storage. And since I cleared it before I started, there's really nothing there other than from this tutorial today. As far as flight restrictions, if you live close to an airport or a military base, you'll quickly find out some areas that you can and can't fly. And also when you take the Part 107 course, you'll learn a lot of this as well. But if you're in a neighborhood and you want to see if you're good to go, what areas are restricted, go ahead and click on the little icon. You can switch from live view to the map here. It's telling me exactly where I am. And if I pinch in a little bit here, you can see where the red areas are, okay? So when I get over here, I know that I'm gonna have some restrictions and I may not even be able to fly. So you can see the exact flight path here, and I have to respect those boundaries and just to ensure that I am able to still keep my Part 107 license, guys. You never know who's around, and there may be some angry neighbors or people that just wanna be negative Nancy's or the Karens in the world, right? So I've had a few people ask me what I'm doing. I've had a few people ask me to show my license card. And, you know, even though you may not get in trouble, from the base or from someone seeing your drone in the air, it could just be a nosy neighbor or something that reports you for flying where you shouldn't be. And typically those invisible boundaries in the air will stop you where it needs to stop you. But there are instances when I type in my phone number, it attaches to my license number, and I'm able to fly in certain areas with height restrictions. So anyways, just keep that in mind and just kind of be aware of your surroundings and flight patterns. Now, when it comes time to switch out your propellers, you'll kind of notice the wear and tear on the blades. And if you've had, you know, I don't even want to say a number of flights, but you'll be able to tell when you should kind of keep your maintenance going on those propellers. I order mine from Amazon. Just watch out and make sure they are authentic. And you'll see between the 4 blades, there are 2 that have a gray circle and then 2 that have just plain black. So you'll know exactly where they need to go. You'll also notice on the drone itself, this has the gray circle to match the gray here. And over here, there's no gray circle. It's just the black base, which goes with the black propeller. Now switching them on and off is super easy. I simply collapse the propeller and then you just push down and twist and pull off. And you'll see the little grooves here. Push in, twist, and you're good to go right there. So these are the low noise propellers. There's 2 in each box. And I tend to have a few boxes on hand. I've clipped some tree branches before, and you know, it kind of puts a little tear in the propellers. Things will happen, guys. So just make sure you have your backup supplies and that you're ready to continue your job. Okay, so these are ND filters for the Mavic 2 Pro. They typically come with any model drone, and you'll definitely want to have these handy for super sunny days or times in the day where you're shooting where maybe it's not ideal with the sun placement. So here's a pack of 2 that I have, and they range in number. So I think it goes ND4 all the way up to, let's see, I'll have to look. Some of them don't say exactly. I'll have to pull them out and look. But I typically use the ND4 or the ND8. I really haven't used anything higher than that. And again, guys, this is basically sunglasses for your lens. So it's gonna kind of diffuse the light a little bit and make things look more clear, more sharp, and just overall a better picture. Okay, so when you get your drone, you're going to have a cover on it already, the cover that comes with it. So when you go to switch out the cover and use an ND filter, it's super easy and super similar to that of the propellers. With just a little twist, it comes right off. So hopefully this stays in focus and you can see. Grab the corners here and you twist. So see, just twist and it comes off. And then you do the same thing to put it back on. You put it back in the little grooves and you twist. So just don't forget to put something back on. You don't want it to leave it without any protective covering. There we go. It just snaps into place. So just be careful with it. Hold the sides of the geared head so you're not gonna damage that when you're trying to finagle this front piece. And then when you switch that one off, point the gimbal down, make sure no dust or any particles get in there. Put your ND filter on and then put the original cover back in the case. So another thing I wanted to mention was the battery. The Mavic 2 Pro series, the batteries are still on top. And it's a good thing and a bad thing. A lot of my batteries that I've had, I mean, I use this every day, multiple times a day, but in the heat, especially here in Florida, the batteries can swell. So make sure you watch out for that. If you see any sort of hump or bump on the battery, it's time to throw that away and get a new one. Make sure when it clicks in, you hear it secure and fasten nicely. If you have to push it or shove it or make it fit somehow, then you probably don't want to use it because it will fall off in flight and then you'll lose your drone. It hasn't happened to me, but I've heard other people that happens to. So don't overcharge your battery, don't leave it in the hot sun. They have protective coverings for these too that you can buy super cheap. So protect that investment, guys, and keep a couple batteries on hand for sure. One other thing, when you're starting out, don't be afraid to put a little bit of tape by the controllers, like put a little up, down, and a right and a left, or whatever you need to do to be comfortable, because sometimes when you're up in the air, you have a little freak out mode and you're going the wrong way, or you're near a power line and you just have to know which way to move so it's not gonna hit anything or damage your drone, and you don't have the obstacle avoidance on. It helps a lot in the beginning to have these controllers labeled. There's no shame in that, trust me. So do yourself a favor, put some masking tape or something and label those controllers until you're fully comfortable. And it will become, you know, like you're riding a bike. It's that easy once you become familiar with it. But in the beginning, just kind of help yourself out. I wanted to quickly show you guys my other drone. This is a Mavic 3 Mini Pro. It's a lot different than the Mavic 2 Pro. It's much smaller, it's lighter, which also means not as good of stabilization in the air, but it has so many great features and the quality is just outstanding. I've actually been using this one a lot more than the Mavic 2 Pro lately. Again, you can see the controller And the drone, also made by DJI. So once you become familiar with the settings on the controller, you'll know, how to navigate with a different drone and a different controller. They make it super simple to kind of follow if you have another one of their products. Another thing about this drone, I like flying it inside. I like using it for reels. The camera on the front, you can have it horizontal or vertical. Makes it super, super easy for reel creation. So I use a combination of vertical clips and horizontal clips to make my reels, and this drone definitely comes in handy. All in all, guys, I think I showed you all of the basic settings and some of the advanced settings that you can start using to practice and feel comfortable with your drone. And don't forget, spend a lot of time and detail on this workbook. And if I didn't say it in the video or anywhere for any other module in the video, always reference your workbook because it's much more detailed with helpful links and pictures and all of that can help you. So you'll see there's several pages here in module 12 regarding aerial photography down to the course and links that you can start looking at to start enrolling in that course. I talk about pretty much everything we talked about just now with the smart controller, phone controller, and all of the basic settings here. And then I just showed you the advanced settings. So you guys should be good to go. And as always, you can let me know if you have any questions. But that's it for now, guys. I hope that's helpful.